coming up on Choppers Politics.
The most important thing, we've said this to many sectors, what we don't want to do is just pull for the easy lever. The easy lever is the immigration lever. What we want to do is do what's more difficult, train people up.
I'm Christopher Hope, the Daily Telegraph's chief political correspondent, and this is Choppers Politics. Second jobs, scrutiny and sleaze. It's not exactly been a quiet week here in Westminster, has it? But away from the rows rumbling on about second jobs for MPs, the Pandora's box opened by the Owen Paterson lobbying scandal, the wheels have kept on turning. The COP26 summit comes to a close after 2 long weeks in Glasgow, and the Telegraph's environment editor Emma Gatten will be helping us sort the wood from the carbon offsetted trees when it comes to green pledges. And later in this programme, we'll be joined by the former head of Marks & Spencer, Arcadia Group and other big companies, Stuart Rose, to talk about whether Brexit is behind the apparent rift between the government and business. But first, this week marks the deadline for social care workers to be double jabbed or risk losing their jobs in England. Care home bosses were asking for the grace period to be extended, but their wish was not granted. With tens of thousands of staff potentially getting the sack, are we looking at another bleak midwinter in care homes? To answer this question, I asked Care Minister and fellow Scouser Julian Keegan MP to join me in the Red Lion pub on Whitehall. Julian Keegan, welcome to the Red Lion pub.
Thank you very much. It's quite unusual, actually, isn't it? 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning.
You're sipping your coffee. It would be a G&T at work lunchtime, I suppose, but you're having your coffee.
Well, lunchtime. I'd probably wait till after I'd finished the day. But,
yes.
But yeah, the G&T is right.
Yes. Now, we're speaking early on November the 11th. It's a deadline for all frontline social care staff to be double jabbed or risk lose their job. Do you know how many social care workers might be leaving the industry this week?
Well, we're waiting to get the data. There is a bit of a lag in the data. We did do an impact assessment at the beginning because obviously this was a hard decision. No one's pretending it's not a hard decision, but we've got people doing the most valuable jobs in a very sort of close and personal way to the most vulnerable people in our society. So that's why we took the hard decision. So we are expecting to get more data. They have done a phenomenal job actually since we announced it. The vaccination rates have gone up massively. And I think we're up to about 95% or
already.
So. Already, yes.
From where?
I think it
80%?
differed around different places. I think one of the lowest was in London with 60-odd%, and they've gone up to close to 90% now.
That's in England only, those figures, are they?
Yeah.
Is there a ballpark figure you're looking at? Tens of thousands might not come back?
Yes, well, some will have exemptions. Some people have still got to have their second dose, so they've had their first dose, so that's quite a high percentage. So there'll probably be a couple of tens of thousands. That's probably where
who will leave the sector.
Yes.
Will that further put pressure on the sector, you think? Or
There's always pressure on this sector. So this sector grows by 1 to 2% in demand every year. It's highly unusual to have a sector where you've first of all got 1.54 million people. It's the biggest workforce, actually, even bigger than the NHS. And it grows by 1 to 2% every year. So they are always running to catch up. In fact, when I first became an MP, I set up an APPG, funny it seems now, with Lou Haig, called
Labour MP.
Labour MP, yes, and a very good friend and fellow footballer. And we set it up and it was called Professionalising the Social Care Workforce. And it was effectively addressing what then was a 122,000 gap in terms of need and how many people worked in the sector. I think today that estimate's around about 105,000, but it's always there. It's always running to keep up. And there's also quite a lot of churn in the sector. So there's a lot. The reform in social care and professionalising the workforce cannot come soon enough.
Is Brexit an issue? Is the issue of people leaving this country not coming back? Is that an issue at the moment with the...
Some people would say, we could get some people come from, various countries. We're trying to get some people over from the Philippines and they've applied for the senior care worker visa. So there is a visa route. And there is, I think there's a salary level, just over 20,000. And, this senior care worker is there today. And some people are using that. But the most important thing, we've said this, to many sectors, what we don't want to do is just pull for the easy lever. The easy lever is the immigration lever. What we want to do is do what's more difficult, and that was actually my old job, apprenticeships and skills, train people up to get the skills, to get the jobs, and then to progress in the jobs. That's the other sort of feature of this sector. There's not enough people progressing.
Why not? Why don't people want to be in social care? What's the problem? They do. Okay.
1.54 million people do. I don't know if you saw the Ed Balls programme that was on.
This week, we'll put a link into our show notes this episode because I heard it was brilliant.
It was brilliant, and it also showed some remarkable people that are really representative of the sector. They are just one of my best mates from schools worked in the sector most of her career. They are just the most valuable people with really rewarding jobs. So a lot of people do want to do it. But, we have made it difficult for them sometimes. They have to train, they have to retrain. There's many people on 0 hours contracts, not their choice.
Are you against those?
I'm not against them, but I think they need to be used wisely. I think they're great for seasonal work. I think they're great for students. I think they're great for when you've got fluctuations in demand, all of those things. But this isn't a structure that has all of those features. So we've got something, 30-40% in certain cases, even higher with some companies. That seems to me to be something that puts insecurity into the workforce that doesn't need to be there. And when people feel insecure, they look around for other things.
Well,
right?
Labour would like to hear you say that.
Well, I'm a reasonable and sensible person, and I always look and think, does that look right? There's not a lot of students working in it. There's not a lot of seasonality. These people don't go out for Christmas or just come in for Christmas. There's a lot of ongoing need. And part of the reforms, we will look at, what good looks like as well. And the reason they're doing that is they're actually flowing the risk down to the individual. That's often what's happening. And, there are some issues with the way that care's commissioned. The minute-by-minute commission's been mentioned. That isn't...
they call it 15-minute care, a quick start. I can only do 3 things if I see this person here, then I'm going to the next house. That kind of idea, that speed.
Yeah, and you need to build relationships with people, and, you need to do what's needed, the right outcome for them. So I'm glad to see, I was talking to a council yesterday and they said, we used to commission it literally by the minute, not even in 15-minute slots, 1-minute slots. And they also used to say, this was domiciliary care, home care. If the person had gone into hospital, they wouldn't pay. So, all these things that someone can't control were out of their control. But they've changed completely now, and now they're paying actually a lot more.
Are you looking at the issue? You mentioned red tape there, how hard it is to be in social care in terms of all the different training. Are you looking to simplify that or strip out elements that maybe are gold-plated, not required?
Simplify and professionalise, because it's the worst of the worst at the moment, because most people don't have a qualification that is transferable, that is trusted in and around the industry. So, yes, we're going to spend at least £500 million in the next 3 years professionalising the workforce, looking at certain schemes, what works. Obviously, we'll take some evidence as well along the way. But this workforce is really valuable and it should be really valued.
Should we pay them more?
Well, pay is always something that's an issue, but we are not setting the pay. What we do in the local council settlement is make sure that in that settlement, and I think Rishi was very clear, that, it
That's
includes
the precept, isn't it? So that'll be going up in the
precept and also the grant from the government. Yeah. And it, says this has been devised with, paying the national living wage in mind, for example. So, that we have the national minimum wage, we have the national living wage, and that's our role, obviously, as government. But, no way do we want a minister for prices or a minister for salaries. That is definitely not our job. It's a very big private sector. But, clearly we do need to make sure that, we change aspects of the funding, which is why the whole reform, don't forget, actually, when you watch the Ed Balls programme, he starts off saying, I now really regret not doing something about this when I could. And, at least we'll not have to say that. We will
Are
do
you doing
something.
enough? You're raising this money for the NHS and social care, but only around 5 billion of that 32 billion is going towards social care. Is that enough?
Well, that's for the next 3 years. And then obviously what will happen after that is the discussion with the Treasury of what is required after that. We're going to ramp up aspects of, for example, the charging reforms. Obviously they kick in towards the end because people do pay some of their own costs if they're means tested to have sufficient funds up to £86,000, which is a cap. But we are going to invest in the workforce. There's a white paper coming out. It's going to talk about, most people want to stay at home. So what more should we do to enable people to stay at home? What kind of supported living for working age adults who are highly disabled, which is about half
When's
the
that
budget.
due, this white paper?
By the end of the year.
Now, the NHS, you've given a longer deadline for NHS staff, haven't you, to be jabbed at the beginning of April. Why that delay?
Well, we actually gave a deadline, quite a long period of time for social care workers as well. We just announced that a number of months ago. Obviously it's only fair to give people time who haven't come forward for the vaccination to give them time to do that. And also we want to persuade people it's the right thing to do. It is our social responsibility. It's been incredibly difficult dealing with COVID. It's been incredibly difficult for care homes, so we prioritise that first. But it's also incredibly difficult for our
As a
NHS
Tory, do you
staff.
understand the point about NHS staff who don't want to get jabbed? Intellectually, do you understand why they might say that?
Intellectually, I understand why people, personal freedom, personal choice, personal decisions, my body. But it's not unusual, actually, in the NHS. There's many vaccines that you do have to work in certain roles in the NHS. In fact, I am training to volunteer in my local hospital. I've had more jabs and vaccines than I've ever had, I think, in my lifetime, to be able to even just volunteer. So it isn't unusual to have some of those conditions of deployment. You're dealing with people at their most vulnerable in life. They're sickest, they're illest, their immune systems are their weakest. So we've really just got to put them first. I think that's really.
Are they selfish for saying they don't want to be jabbed? Is that a selfish thing?
I would never say that, but the reality is that it is fair and reasonable to say we do need to prioritise the people who are the most vulnerable.
Professor Martin Green said this week that social care is a child the government is irritated with, while the NHS is a favoured child. And now, as Care Minister, do you accept that?
No, and I definitely don't feel that. And anybody who's watching the programme, I've mentioned it again, or anybody who's got a relative in social care would never, ever think that about the people who are looking after their elderly relatives or their working age disabled
But maybe we
adults.
need to think of social care in the same way we have this big heart around the NHS, don't we?
100%.
So, but maybe transfer some of that love into social care and see how important that is too. Do you know what I mean? That's what he means.
Well, we have a big campaign actually, which we just started last week, which is called Made with Care, and it's an advert. You're going to see it on billboards, you'll see it on the television, and it's really to be a great advert for what the sector does, but also to be a recruitment campaign as well to support the recruitment of more people. But yes, it is. I personally have always had that. I mean, my grandmother had dementia. She was in home towards the end of her life, and anyone who's ever been in that situation knows instinctively that that they're completely reliant on people in social care doing things for their loved ones.
Now, you're seeing figures in government that I can't see. Will Christmas be cancelled because of cases of COVID, deaths which are rising but not as high as last year?
I don't believe so. I mean, it was awful last year. We all sat there with tons of turkey and no people. At one point, it looked, when they were talking about the HGV drivers, it looked like we'd have, lots of people and no turkey.
Yes.
But no, I think hopefully the turkey and the people will all be together this Christmas.
We might tighten rules, maybe more work from home.
We've got plan
B.
A and plan B, right?
We're in plan A at the moment.
Yes, and we've laid both of them down. And clearly plan B is laid down as an option. But
you're not worried at the moment?
No, I mean, the booster jab's going well. People are coming forward. They're getting the booster. Young people are coming forward, getting their doses, getting their vaccines. I wouldn't say I'm not worried. Being in government during a global pandemic you couldn't ever say that you're not worried. You worry every day about something.
Is there a number at which deaths have to go above in England?
There's not a single number, but there is a range of things, and they are looking all the time.
A dashboard.
They're all the time looking at various data and looking at all these things and it's moving, obviously, because the vaccination, the wall of defence which comes from vaccination, is moving all the time. We've been very lucky in our country, actually. The people, by and large, have really embraced the vaccine.
We're looking into the start of the inquiry into COVID, and that's maybe 6 months away now. Do you think the history might judge the government kindly?
I hope so, because I think, first of all the comparisons that people did at various times were all very much oversimplified, comparing us to all various countries. And of course, the pack of cards you start with, the type of nation you are, the density of the population, the age of the population. There's so many different things. And then you've got what we started with. We had no diagnostics, no testing at all in the country, and we had to build it. I mean, it's always difficult. You never want to be the person making the tough decisions. The asymptomatic nature of it is the thing that is fundamentally something that once we understood that, changed every plan.
We're two Scousers. We're in the pub. Is your government corrupt?
Definitely not. No.
Is the problem here the rules? So if you look at the cases been coming up now, they appear to me, the individual MPs, they say Geoffrey Cox and others, they are just applying what the rules are. They are allowed to vote from wherever they are in the world. They are allowed to have second jobs. Maybe too much money being paid in a second job, but that's not in the rules. There's no limit on what you be paid. Is it the rules?
I think first of all, we've got to put it into context. A couple of weeks ago, we had the unbelievably sad death of our colleague, Sir David Amess, and everybody who heard about him, his 38 years of service, basically said, God, why don't we hear more about people who just doing their job day in, day out, and getting on with their job.
But shouldn't they be spending more time on being MPs than second jobs? That may be the point. So,
well, most people, I think, don't have a second job, probably. But the reality is, everyone has their individual circumstances and situations. Some people want to keep their profession. They want to keep their, if you're in a seat that it's a very insecure job, actually, politics. So, if you've got a family to feed, you do also have to sometimes.
But how much money do you need, I suppose?
Well, different people need different amounts of money. When I was 20, I didn't need as much as I did when I was 40, and probably not as much as I do when I'm now.
The problem is, Geoffrey Cox is declaring all the everything he's earning, and he
always has. There's no hiding it. He's never hid it from the beginning. And I suppose if it was banned, he would be a QC, not an MP. That's the reality of it. And I think we've got to be, the rules are important, and we will, I'm sure, be continually looking at the rules, and probably with all of this discussion they'll be looked at again, and certainly in the appeals process for the Standards Committee. I was actually quite shocked when I realised there wasn't an appeals process. So I do think that does need to be looked at. But, the reality is what we need to be careful of is we need to attract everybody into the House of Commons. We've got some very young MPs come straight from university who, can be a voice for their generation. We've also got people like me who've worked for 20, 30 years in another industry, come as a second career. And we've got people who come at very different times with very different skill sets. And we want to encourage all of that. It's hard enough to become an MP, actually. There's so many hurdles you have to go through as well, that if somebody's determined to serve their country, then I wouldn't want to say just because they've got skills that are extremely valuable in the open market, they should be excluded from being an MP. No, I don't think that's right.
Julian Keegan, thank you for joining us today on Choppers Politics. It's been great to have you on, and we'll make sure we'll put a note and a link to the Ed Balls programme in the show notes of this episode. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right. Tonal change now, everyone. Stay with us. In just one moment, we're not having any interview. We're having a former head of M&S interview on whether Boris Johnson really has beef with business. Right after this.
It begins with a miracle treatment.
These treatments were seen as a wonder drug to benefit all of us.
Young lives injected with hope.
This is going to transform your life.
But the treatment's tainted. It contains a fatal poison.
I came down with an illness where I basically passed out at work.
And it starts to infect the very people it's meant to help.
And then the damage began.
Damage so far-reaching, it becomes one of the biggest medical disasters in history.
It's certainly hard to believe they sold all this product knowing it was infected.
Join me as I trace it from the veins of innocent people back to a notorious American prison in the Telegraph's latest podcast. It's Bed of Lies Series 2 with me, Cara McGugan. A true story of greed, betrayal and deception, and it ends with a death sentence.
In essence, they put money over life.
Search Bed of Lies wherever you're listening to this.
Now cast your minds back, listeners, 3 years to 2018, when the government was in the midst of the Brexit negotiations, and a certain then Foreign Secretary is said to have responded to corporate concerns over a hard Brexit with a 4-letter word beginning with F. Since then, some see the Tories as having transformed from the party of business to the party at odds with it. And my next guest is a Tory peer who's been at the top of major retailers, the Arcadia Group, M&S and Argos. And he's got some strong words for how the government can repair this relationship. Lord Rose of Monaghan, Stuart Rose, as known to millions of people from our business pages. Welcome to the pub.
Never been here before, but I'm delighted to be here. It's a bit early in the morning, no pint.
No pint. So you formerly, of course, ran the Remain campaign during the Brexit referendum. I think there's been a hangover from that point now. Now we have a Brexit government, a Brexit-supporting government. Is there an issue, do you think, between ministers and business? And if so, why?
Well, listen, I've been brought up all my life to work on the basis that if we get the best out of people or the best out of businesses or the best out of anything, we have to cooperate. And what I think is rather sad is that, we forget Brexit vote was in 2016. We're just on the dawn of 2022. And here we are, we're still talking about it. We're still looking backwards and when we should be looking forwards because there are so many issues and problems around the world today that we need to deal with. And if we deal with them in a cooperative way, we'll get better results.
Is business pro-Remain? Because that's I think, how it's seen. That's explaining the current situation.
That's an interesting question, and I do believe that there is still a feeling that business is predominantly Remain, and I think business is tarred slightly with that label, and I think it's unfortunate because I think business is actually a lot more pragmatic and forward-looking than anybody really understands. Business people want to run a business successfully. They want to run a business profitably, and they want to run a business for the good of their investors and for the good of themselves. So, why would they want to be stuck in a trench which is now, done 6 years ago?
Yes. And back at the time, of course, it was seen to be the CBI and big bodies were behind the Remain campaign. But when you ran that campaign, it wasn't quite how you found it, was it?
No, I mean, it's quite interesting. Listen, I have to comfort myself from time to time when people ask me why on earth I ever got involved. My mum always said to me that, darling, if you feel that you ought to do something or if you make a contribution, you should go out there and do it and don't worry about the results. So that was a long time ago and the bruises have long since disappeared. But at the end of the day, I was shocked during the campaign that when we were trying to actively galvanise business into understanding what the implications of Brexit were going to be, that almost to a man and a woman, we couldn't find anybody who'd stand and put their head above the parapet. I wrote to hundreds of chief executives and chairmen and women. And
personally wrote to them?
Yeah, I just sent a weekend, topping and tailing letters. Dear John, dear Mary, dear this, dear that, yours sincerely, Stuart Rose. And all the replies were to the effect, look, absolutely, we completely sort of sympathise with what you're trying to do. Actually, we probably think that Brexit is not a great idea, but we don't want to get involved.
That's odd, isn't it? So there's a kind of feeling that business was against the idea of Brexit. I guess it was against any more borders. Is it more the case that business wants a quiet life from government? Is that the truth of it?
I think business wants... I think they were more concerned, and what they said they were more concerned about was the fact that they had, customers, clients who sat on both sides of the fence, and they didn't want to be seen to take a position.
Right.
So the easiest thing to do was not to take a position, but actually to their cost, because many of them subsequently found that actually what they'd actually ended up with didn't suit their business model.
So why do you have a Prime Minister who says privately, "F*** business"?
Well, you asked me, and I can't answer the question. I don't know, but it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard because at the end of the day, very simplistically, we only know a successful form of economics, which is capitalism, and capitalism and the creation of wealth and the spending of wealth and building the infrastructure that the Prime Minister ironically wants to build. And yet, if we're not bringing the pounds in to spend that money, where are we going to get it from?
You're a Tory peer, a Conservative peer.
I'm a Conservative with a small c.
You're part of the Tory establishment, Stuart Rose. Why
I
can't
am
you...
not establishment. I am just one of those chaps who happens to be in there. Quite why I'm in there, I've no idea.
You're there for your services to retail and the rest. I mean, your background is extraordinary. Burton Group, Argos, Arcadia. You ran M&S, you ran Woolworths, etc. I mean, you know about business. I mean, shouldn't you be banging on the door of number 10 saying there's a problem here, Prime Minister, let's sort it out?
Well, interestingly enough, and first of all, in the House of Lords, there's very little debate about business. But when you actually have formal business debates, you might have one a couple of times a year. People line up to talk. You might find 50 or 60 people talking. You then get allocated your 2 minutes. Everybody says the same pretty well right the way through.
That's in the Lords, but behind the scenes, you're a peer.
Well, behind the scenes, sadly, I'm now slightly out of it. And by the way, this is not a complaint, but I have not seen anybody at a senior political level since the day the Brexit announcement was made. You could connect the two things.
You're not persona non grata.
I couldn't possibly comment. But I think at the end of the day, that was history, and I'm part of that history which has been swept away. But I talk to a lot of business people. I'm involved in business. I run 2 or 3 large businesses in the UK as a chairman. And there does seem to be a disconnect between business and politicians, and it's something which actually completely mystifies me. Do
you blame the CBI? The CBI recently, until the Brexit deal was done, was quite pushing hard against a no deal. The government had to back a no deal to get a deal. Do you remember all that kind of chess game that went on in 2019? And that would have poisoned the well slightly as well.
I think it did poison the well, and there is therefore this sort of hangover sort of feeling or smell that that business actually isn't on our side. We are trying to get a job done and they are against it. But actually, I don't think that's the case. And I think privately there are ways, you don't need to talk to business people by going through the CBI. you could talk to them individually. But I just don't see the sort of connection. I don't talk to business people who say to me, I've had a discussion about this, I've had a discussion about that, I've lobbied about this or lobbied about that. Or are we allowed to use the word lobby this week? But
speaking to.
It's means lobbying in the true sense.
Yes. Well, you have to lobby if you're in an interest group, yeah.
Well, if you don't, there's no progress.
How about Labour? I mean, if you're getting no joy, if your community, the business community, is getting no joy with the Tories, why not talk to Labour? Or are they difficult to get to as well?
I think at the moment they're so preoccupied with their own internal problems that they just sort of haven't reached out. Now, there will be a time when they ought to, and I think actually they should be preparing the ground if they want to be credible opposition and they want to be actually preparing themselves for power at some point in time, and inevitably Labour will get in again, that they should be. But again, there seems to be a sort of gap, a gulf. And in their case, it's about, it's them business people. They're all, what is it? We're all on jets to Birmingham drinking champagne, or on jets to Manchester drinking champagne.
Yes, quite. And they take business for granted, don't they, the Tory government, I think. There's a feeling they'll always pay the taxes.
Well, they'll find a way through. And it's interesting enough, you talk about that. That's exactly what is happening now with the situation that we've got post-COVID, post-Brexit, that we've got all these issues coming to us. I mean, I think, COVID's been a terrible thing.
Yeah.
But COVID is just one of a number of terrible events that have taken place, in a life as long as mine. You go back to the Second World War, then you go back to the sort of all the issues we used to have with massive inflation, the economy starting, the economy stopping, the global financial crisis. Then you had, all sorts of other things. Now we've got COVID, but the COVID's finished. That's gone. Been there, seen it, done it, got the T-shirt. What's next? Well, inflation is a serious issue coming our way. Climate change is a massive issue coming our way. The two are connected. And then you've got one other thing which nobody seems to talk about on a global basis. What about migration? Instead of having COP26, we almost need to have, MiG-1. How is the world going to sit down and deal with this crisis?
Back on retail, what worries you about the future of the high street at the moment?
Well, I'm really worried about inflation. I mean, you read the paper this morning, and your paper and others, that, we've got inflation. The government has finally woken up, or the Bank of England has woken up to the fact that inflation is going to peak at above 5%. I think it'll be for longer rather than shorter.
For how long do you think?
Well, look what's happening. America now at 6.2% this morning. The factory gate inflation in China is now at 13%, which even shocked some of the analysts when it came out yesterday. And personally speaking to people who are involved in business, costs coming through are being passed on, and these are not costs being passed in at 4%. They're being passed in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
That's going to hit prices.
Take the hospitality. You cannot run a pub like this by not putting those costs through.
It's not further weaken high street against big players like Amazon, won't it? It'll be worse.
Yeah, but even Amazon have got the problems because you've got shortage of labour. You've got raw material prices going up. You've got bureaucracy to deal with now, and we've got an added problem in the UK with our, with the brouhaha going on with the Europeans, which is all added costs. And then you've got the things which we didn't plan for, like the Suez Canal closes. All the boxes are in the wrong places. At the same time, you've got COVID in China, so they can't get the boxes out. Going back to your original point, us business people are supposed to just sail through all this and make sure that everybody in the UK has a turkey on their table at Christmas time, that Johnny or Mary's present turns up at the right time, in the right place, at the right price. Miraculously, probably it will happen, but it will happen because people are getting on with it and doing it. But it would happen better, I think, if there was more understanding on both sides of what the problems and the issues were.
There was no business council in Number 10, is there? There used to be on Theresa May. I'm sure you're on one of them, weren't you?
I think I was on one of them with Gordon Brown once, but at least it did meet and there was something. To my knowledge, I don't know what's going on.
Well, there isn't one. There isn't one.
And that's sad. Now, whether they have ad hoc meetings, whether there's a cosy chat, fireside chat in Number 10 or anywhere else.
He does phone calls, I think, to SMEs once a week and key business people in various supply chains. That's the interaction at the moment, it seems, by the PM personally.
I'm not sure how effective that might be. You need some heavy hitters around the table, and you need some good people around who are prepared to talk truth to power and actually understand the real issues.
And you found them worthwhile? Is it a talking shop, or is it worthwhile?
It's always worthwhile talking. If you don't talk and don't understand each other's problems, you're going nowhere. I'm not suggesting you have a talking shop. I'm suggesting you have some sort of mechanism where people can exchange confidentially some of the quiet issues that are around that need to be dealt with, where government and business together can end up with a better result.
And just finally, Stuart Rose, we're looking into the CBI conference that starts in about 10 days' time now. What do you want to see happen at the CBI conference? Perhaps a turning point in this difficult relationship between the government and business.
I just want to see some mutual cooperation. I want to see understanding from both parties about what the problems are. I want to see people who are listening, actually properly listening, not listening with tin ears.
Well, Stuart Rose, Lord Rose of Monaghan, thank you for joining us for the first time in the Red Lion pub, and please come again. Thank you.
Well, I will if you buy me a pint.
I certainly will. Now, it would be remiss of us here on Choppers Politics not to talk about COP26, with the climate summit in Glasgow coming to an end in the coming few days. The pledges have flown in thick and fast over the past fortnight. Each day has seen the government and other authorities making one bold statement after another on the success of talks about the future of the planet. But how many of these announcements are simply hot air? Carbon emissions, if you like. I asked the Daily Telegraph's environment editor, Emma Gatten, to help us sort through the greenwashing. Welcome to Choppers Politics. Great to have you on.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
I'm looking at a screen of you. I can see you're speaking in some kind of large marquee full of hot air. Is that right?
Yeah, and there's a literal greenhouse effect going on over here. It gets very hot when the sun is shining.
I bet it does. Now, you've been up there for the past 10 days. How have you found COP? All of the world is there, in a sense, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, one of my colleagues from one of the other papers described it as being like Tory conference on speed. It is almost impossible to know what is going on at any one moment because you've got, 197 countries, all got their own thing, all got their own agendas. It's manic.
And Emma, there's a lot of talk about greenwash, hot air, the idea that there's lots of talking by people who are frankly paid to talk because they're politicians or officials or NGO campaigners, but nothing much is happening. These are all just bits of paper without any real meaning. Do you worry about that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a concern, and it's definitely an emerging one. I mean, the UN's kind of said they're going to put together a task force to look at greenwashing because it's such a massive issue. I mean, when you have, for instance, Mark Carney saying he's pulled together financial institutions that are putting $130 trillion into net zero strategies. I mean, what does that even mean at that point? You've got to ask the question there.
But the pledges have flown thick and fast, Emma Gatten, haven't they? And I wonder if we can try and look down at what's actually been agreed and then perhaps end up where this leaves us by the weekend. I mean, on coal, let's start there. What's happened on coal?
So what the government announced last week was they came out with a statement that said 190 countries and organisations were now committed to the phasing out of the use of coal. What this actually was that they had organised some of the countries and companies, organisations that were already committed to coal, plus some new countries, into a sort of pledge to be announced at the COP.
So those are actual pledges there, Emma Gatten, aren't they, on coal?
Yeah, so there were some new pledges there. So I think there's 23 new countries that were joining this agreement to phase out coal, but it wasn't quite clear immediately what they were actually agreeing to. It then kind of emerged the next day that some of them had only agreed to sort of the principle of phasing out coal without actually agreeing that they would actually phase out coal or that they would actually stop building new coal power plants.
Yeah, so it's not really clear. So it's all down to what the actual words mean, isn't it? And trees. Now, trees is easier to understand, possibly, right?
Possibly. So that was a big commitment that was a UK-led announcement to kind of reverse deforestation by 2030. And that did have some big players that had signed onto it, Indonesia again and Brazil. So that, I think, has been one of the bigger achievements of the COP. But we did see, Indonesia came back the next day and they were upset about some of the wording. I mean, Zach Goldsmith had phrased it one way that said it was ending deforestation. Indonesia had a different interpretation and felt like if they just increased or maintained the forest cover, that would fulfill the pledges, but maybe had not have been in the spirit of what the deforestation pledge was for.
And I guess all this takes us towards the big question is whether we can hit this 1.5 degree target. Do explain what that means to the layman who's not following it closely. What does 1.5 degrees mean?
So 1.5 is the top aim of the Paris Agreement that was signed in 2015. The wording of that was the countries agreed to keep warming well below 2C and sort of preferably, ideally, 1.5C. And some countries are more committed to the 1.5C than other countries. China prefers to keep in the well below 2C wording, whereas the UK has really made 1.5C the focus of this COP26. The ideal is we never get above 2C, we never get above 1.5C. The other big question that is emerging out of this COP is, do we set ourselves a goal of getting back to 1.5C? So we overshoot, which looks like it's inevitable at the moment, and then we have some kind of carbon dioxide removals that pull us back to 1.5C before 2100.
What does victory look like for Boris Johnson this weekend as COP closes in Glasgow?
So the key thing that is emerging is this idea that we aren't going to get enough pledges at this COP this year to say we are on track for 1.5. We've done enough for the next 10 years. So the best really he can hope for at this point is that countries agree that they will come back next year with some better pledges, some better targets.
Whoa. You mean this isn't it? There's more COP to come?
I'm afraid this isn't it. And
That's a cop-out, Emma Gatten.
And I think Boris kind of conceded that yesterday when he sort of said, we're not going to solve climate change in one go. It just isn't going to happen.
So where's the next COP?
The next COP's in Egypt.
That's nicer for you, isn't it? Look, I'm only slightly teasing. It matters, this stuff. Matters more than anything else down here in Westminster. Do you think we might get towards 1.8? What do all these things announced so far on temperature, cold, trees, cash, what does that equal? I mean, I saw a forecast of around only a 1.8 degree increase, but not everyone agrees with that.
Yeah, so there has been, Australian researchers that reckoned that all of the pledges looking into the future could get us down to 1.8. But a lot of them, there have been more sober assessments that are based on saying, well, let's look at what is actually policy, what are actually concrete pledges that are going to happen in the next 10 years. And that looks more like 2.4 C. So it's about how you measure it. What do we make of India saying they're going to be net zero in 2070? Does that have any real world meaning at this point?
Yeah. Well, Emma Gatten, the Telegraph's environment editor, she's the one to watch on COP this weekend. Thanks for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
And if you'd like to read some more of Emma's pieces from COP26, and if you're not already a Telegraph subscriber, please go to telegraph.co.uk/chopper and get your first month's subscription completely free of charge. So, thank you to my guests this week, Julian Keegan, Stuart Rose, and of course the Telegraph's Emma Gatten. Thank you to my producers, Giles Gear, Louisa Wells, and Theodora Loulidis. But most importantly of all, thank you to you for listening. If you can't get enough Chopper's Politics once a week, and frankly, I don't blame you, you can get more of my inside track from the corridors of power in Westminster in the daily Chopper's Politics newsletter, every weekday lunchtime straight to your email inbox. I'll put the link to how to sign up in the show notes to this episode. And if that's not enough, please read my weekly Peterborough column every Saturday in the Daily Telegraph, full of the best political and celeb gossip. You won't regret it. And finally, of course, please do buy a copy of the Daily Telegraph if you can. Until next time, though, cheerio!